James Hargrove had spent over 4 decades in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Pines. The house was more than just bricks and mortar. It was where he and his late wife, Margaret, had built their life together. Every corner held a memory: Sunday mornings on the porch, family gatherings in the garden, and late nights by the fireplace reminiscing about their youth. The garage, standing proudly at the edge of his modest property, was no exception. It housed not only tools and supplies but also cherished relics of the past: Margaret's antique sewing machine, boxes of family photographs, and the old bicycle he had taught his granddaughter to ride. Life had slowed for James after Margaret's passing 5 years earlier. His days were now spent tending to his garden, feeding the neighborhood birds, and reading by the window. At 78, his mobility was limited, and though he didn't drive anymore, the garage was still a vital part of his home. He visited it weekly to tinker with small repairs or simply to bask in the comforting presence of his memories. One crisp autumn afternoon, James returned from his usual trip to the grocery store. He parked his old sedan in the driveway, its engine sputtering as it settled into stillness. As he stepped out, his eyes caught a glaring anomaly. A large sold sign was plastered across the garage door. The bold red letters were impossible to miss, and for a moment he thought it must be some kind of mistake. James stood there, gripping his shopping bag, staring at the sign as though it were some strange apparition. His mind raced. Was it a prank? Some error in the system? Surely his garage couldn't have been sold. He still owned it. Setting his groceries down on the porch, he shuffled closer to inspect the sign. It was official, bearing the emblem of the Willow Pines Homeowners Association. Below the sold notice was a smaller text: property has been reassigned as per Homeowners Association Regulation 12.4. For inquiries, contact the Willow Pines Homeowners Association office. James's hands trembled as he read the notice again, disbelief flooding his senses. He hurried inside, his heart pounding. The Homeowners Association office had always been a thorn in his side, with its endless notices about lawn maintenance, mailbox colors, and acceptable shades of fence paint. But this was an entirely new level of intrusion. He reached for the phone and dialed the number listed on the notice. After several rings, a clipped and formal voice answered. Willow Pines Homeowners Association, this is Linda speaking. How may I assist you? This is James Hargrove, he began, his voice unsteady. There's a sign on my garage, something about it being sold? I don't understand. That's my property. I didn't agree to sell anything. There was a pause, and James could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. Mr. Hargrove, let me pull up your account, Linda replied, her tone cool and detached. After a few moments, she continued, Ah yes, I see it here. Your garage was deemed unused property and was reassigned as per Homeowners Association Regulation 12.4. It was sold last week to a private buyer. Sold? James's voice rose. Without my consent? That's my garage. I use it regularly. Mr. Hargrove, Linda said, her voice taking on an edge of impatience, the Homeowners Association has the authority to reassign auxiliary structures that are determined to be abandoned or unmaintained. Notices were sent to your registered email address over the past 3 months. Since we received no response, the board proceeded with the reassignment. James gripped the edge of his kitchen counter for support. I don't use email. I haven't for years. Why wasn't I contacted in person or by mail? And the garage isn't abandoned, it's full of my belongings. I'm sorry, Mr. Hargrove, Linda replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. The process was followed according to regulation. If you have further concerns, I suggest you submit a formal complaint in writing. Before James could respond, the line went dead. He stood there in stunned silence, the phone still clutched in his hand. The reality of the situation began to sink in. His garage, his memories, his belongings had been sold without his knowledge or consent. How was that even legal? He felt a surge of anger and helplessness, emotions that had grown unfamiliar to him in recent years. Determined to get to the bottom of this, James decided to visit the Homeowners Association office in person. The next morning he donned his warmest coat and set out on foot, leaning heavily on his cane as he navigated the few blocks to the office. The Homeowners Association building was a sleek, modern structure that felt entirely out of place in the otherwise quaint neighborhood. Inside, the air was cold and sterile, with minimalist decor and a receptionist who barely looked up as James entered. "I'm here to speak with someone about my garage," he announced, his voice firm despite the quiver in his hands. The receptionist, a young woman with a disinterested expression, gestured to a clipboard on the counter. "Sign in. Someone will be with you shortly." James complied and took a seat, his mind racing as he replayed the conversation with Linda. After what felt like an eternity, a man in a crisp suit appeared and introduced himself as Tom Grayson, the Homeowners Association president. He led James into a small conference room and gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Hargrove, I understand you have concerns about your garage," Tom began, his tone exuding a practiced politeness. "Concerns?" James retorted, his voice rising. "You sold my property without telling me. That's more than a concern, it's theft." Tom raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Now, Mr. Hargrove, I assure you that everything was done according to Homeowners Association regulations. Notices were sent, and the garage was determined to be unused and unmaintained. The sale was finalized last week." James leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped his cane. "I didn't receive any notice. I don't use email, and that garage is neither unused nor unmaintained. It's full of my belongings, things that mean the world to me." Tom's expression flickered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I understand this is upsetting, Mr. Hargrove. If you feel there has been an error, you're welcome to file a formal appeal with the board. However, I must warn you that the reassignment is final, and the new owner has already taken possession." James felt the weight of those words settle over him like a heavy blanket. "Possession?" he echoed. "You mean they've already taken what's inside?" Tom hesitated. "I believe the new owner has begun clearing out the space, yes." It was the final blow. James's treasured keepsakes, the tangible reminders of a life well lived, were being tossed aside as if they were trash. He rose from his chair, his legs trembling with the effort. "This isn't over," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within him. "You've made a mistake, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." As James left the office, he felt a newfound determination. He might be old, but he wasn't powerless. This fight wasn't just about a garage, it was about standing up to the injustice that had stripped him of something irreplaceable. And he wasn't about to back down. James Hargrove returned home from the Homeowners Association office with a heavy heart and a restless mind. His encounter with Tom Grayson, the Homeowners Association president, had only deepened his sense of injustice. The thought of his garage, his safe haven, his treasure trove of memories being cleared out by a stranger was unbearable. But James was not the type to give up. Though he had little experience dealing with legal or bureaucratic battles, he resolved to uncover the truth and reclaim what was rightfully his. The first step was gathering information. James sat at his kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea in front of him, and pulled out a notebook. He listed everything he knew. The garage was sold without his consent. The Homeowners Association claimed to have sent notifications via email, which he never received, and the clause they cited, Regulation 12.4, allegedly allowed the sale of unused auxiliary structures. But James knew his garage was far from unused. It was filled with belongings he had lovingly maintained over the years. Realizing he needed help, James decided to call Alex, his young neighbor who often helped him with technology. Alex was in his early 30s, a freelance web developer with a knack for troubleshooting and a good heart. When James explained the situation, Alex didn't hesitate. "Mr. Hargrove, this sounds completely wrong," Alex said over the phone. "I'll come by tonight, and we can figure this out together." That evening, Alex arrived with his laptop and a determined expression. Sitting across from James at the kitchen table, he began by searching for the Homeowners Association's bylaws. The document was a dense, jargon-filled PDF, but Alex navigated it with ease. "Here it is," Alex said, pointing to his screen. "Regulation 12.4. It states that the Homeowners Association has the authority to reassign auxiliary structures deemed abandoned or unmaintained, but only after a thorough inspection and written consent from the homeowner." "Written consent?" James repeated, his eyebrows furrowing. "They never asked for my consent." "That's a major red flag," Alex replied. If they didn't get your approval, they violated their own rules. Let's keep digging. Next, Alex logged into James's email account. James hadn't used it in years, and the inbox was a chaotic mess of spam and outdated messages. Alex sorted through it, eventually finding several emails from the homeowners association. Here are the notifications they mentioned, Alex said, scrolling through the messages. But they're all marked unread. And look at the timestamps they were sent between 2 and 4 a.m. Who checks their email at that time? James shook his head. I wouldn't have seen those even if I still used email. Why didn't they send a letter or knock on my door? Alex nodded. It's incredibly shady. They knew you probably wouldn't see these. I bet they were counting on it. As they continued their investigation, Alex stumbled upon something even more troubling. A quick search of public property records revealed the buyer of the garage a company called Pine Investments, LLC. Further digging uncovered that Pine Investments was owned by none other than the Homeowners Association president's brother-in-law. This is a conflict of interest if I've ever seen one, Alex said, his voice tinged with anger. It looks like they orchestrated this whole thing to benefit their own family. James felt a surge of both indignation and hope. So, what do we do now? He asked. We need evidence, Alex replied. If we can prove they violated their own rules and acted in bad faith, you might have a strong case. Let's start by documenting everything. Over the next few days, James and Alex worked tirelessly. They photographed the garage's contents, capturing the neatly organized shelves, the well-maintained tools, and the sentimental items stored inside. They printed out copies of the Homeowners Association's bylaws, highlighting the sections they believed had been violated. Alex also drafted a formal complaint to the Homeowners Association, detailing the irregularities they had discovered. While they waited for a response from the Homeowners Association, Alex suggested reaching out to other neighbors. You're probably not the only one they've wronged, he said. If we can find others with similar experiences, it'll strengthen your case. James hesitated. He wasn't one to stir up trouble, and the idea of knocking on doors felt daunting. But Alex's encouragement spurred him on. Together, they visited several homes in the neighborhood, explaining James's situation and asking if anyone else had faced issues with the Homeowners Association. To their surprise, a few neighbors shared similar stories. One couple had been fined thousands of dollars for minor landscaping infractions. Another family had been pressured into repainting their home despite meeting the Homeowners Association standards. But the most shocking revelation came from a woman named Clara, who lived just a few streets away. They tried to sell my shed last year, Clara revealed. Said it was abandoned, even though I use it all the time for gardening. I fought back, and they eventually backed down, but it was a nightmare. I had to threaten them with legal action. Clara's story bolstered James's resolve. With her permission, Alex recorded her statement and added it to their growing file of evidence. By the end of the week, they had a robust case that painted a damning picture of the Homeowners Association's practices. James submitted his complaint to the Homeowners Association, requesting an immediate halt to the garage's sale and a formal investigation into the board's actions. But days turned into weeks, and there was no response. Meanwhile, Pine Investments began clearing out the garage, discarding items that James had spent a lifetime cherishing. The sight of a stranger carting away his belongings filled James with a mixture of grief and fury. "They're trying to wear you down," Alex said one evening as they watched the activity from James's porch. "But we're not going to let them get away with this." Realizing they needed to escalate the matter, Alex suggested contacting local media. "A story like this will get people's attention," he said. "Public pressure might force the Homeowners Association to act." James agreed, though the idea of being in the spotlight made him nervous. Alex reached out to a local news station, explaining the situation and providing the evidence they had gathered. Within days, a reporter arrived to interview James. The story aired later that week, casting a harsh light on the Homeowners Association's actions and sparking outrage among viewers. The media attention proved to be a turning point. Neighbors rallied around James, attending Homeowners Association meetings and demanding accountability. The Homeowners Association board, faced with mounting public scrutiny, could no longer ignore the issue. But instead of admitting fault, they doubled down, insisting they had acted within their rights. Undeterred, James and Alex prepared for the next phase of their fight: legal action. They contacted a lawyer specializing in homeowners association disputes, who agreed to take the case after reviewing the evidence. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, James felt he had a real chance at justice. The garage might have been taken from him, but his determination to stand up against wrongdoing remained unshaken. The legal proceedings began on a chilly Monday morning, with James Hargrove dressed in his best suit, one that Margaret had insisted he keep for important occasions. He felt a mix of apprehension and determination as Alex helped him into the car. The courtroom was an unfamiliar place to James, but as he took his seat next to their attorney, Claire Watson, he reminded himself that this was about more than a garage. It was about standing up to the blatant misuse of power and protecting his dignity. The case centered around two critical points: whether the homeowners association had violated their own regulations in selling James's garage, and whether the sale itself was influenced by unethical motives, given the buyer's connection to the homeowners association president. Claire had spent weeks meticulously building their case, drawing on the evidence James and Alex had gathered, statements from neighbors like Clara, and the homeowners association's own bylaws. The courtroom was packed with neighbors and even a few reporters who had followed James's story since it aired on the local news. The atmosphere was tense as the homeowners association's attorney presented their defense, claiming that every step of the sale had been conducted in accordance with homeowners association regulations. They argued that James's failure to respond to email notifications justified the sale under the clause regarding unused property. Claire, however, was prepared. She began by pointing out the inconsistencies in the homeowners association's claims. "Your Honor," she said, gesturing to a printed copy of the homeowners association's bylaws, Regulation 12.4 clearly states that homeowner consent is required before any auxiliary structure can be reassigned or sold. Mr. Hargrove's consent was neither sought nor obtained. Instead, the homeowners association relied solely on email communication, sent at odd hours, to an account they had no confirmation was active. The judge, an older man with a stern demeanor, raised an eyebrow. "Miss Watson, are you suggesting that the homeowners association intentionally bypassed proper channels to expedite the sale?" "Yes, Your Honor," Claire replied. "We have further evidence suggesting that this sale was not only procedurally flawed but also ethically compromised." She then presented the public property records showing that Pine Investments, the buyer of the garage, was owned by the homeowners association president's brother-in-law. This conflict of interest casts serious doubt on the integrity of the homeowners association's decision-making process. It appears this sale was less about enforcing community standards and more about personal gain. The homeowners association's attorney tried to counter, arguing that the relationship between the buyer and the president was irrelevant and that the garage's condition supported their decision, but Claire was relentless. She called Clara as a witness, who testified about her own experience with the homeowners association attempting to sell her shed. "They tried to label my shed as abandoned," Clara said firmly, "but when I fought back, they backed off. It's clear they're targeting properties they think they can get away with taking." When it was James's turn to testify, he spoke with quiet dignity, describing the personal significance of the garage and the belongings it held. "This isn't just a garage to me," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "It's part of my home, part of my life. To have it taken from me without my knowledge, without my consent, feels like a violation of everything I've worked for." The courtroom fell silent as James finished speaking. Even the homeowners association's attorney seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The judge asked a few follow-up questions before calling for a recess to review the evidence. During the break, Alex sat with James in the courthouse cafeteria, reassuring him that they had done everything possible. "No matter what happens, Mr. Hargrove, you stood up for yourself. That takes real courage." After what felt like an eternity, the court reconvened. The judge began by addressing the audience. This case raises significant concerns about the governance and practices of the Willow Pines Homeowners Association. It is the responsibility of such organizations to act transparently and in the best interest of their members. Turning to James, the judge continued, "Mr. Hargrove, it is clear to this court that you were not properly notified about the sale of your garage. The reliance on email alone, especially without confirmation of receipt, was insufficient and inappropriate. Furthermore, the conflict of interest involving the buyer raises serious ethical questions. The judge then delivered his ruling. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Hargrove. The sale of the garage is hereby declared null and void. Additionally, the Homeowners Association is ordered to compensate Mr. Hargrove for the emotional distress and loss of property caused by their actions. James felt a wave of relief wash over him as the courtroom erupted in applause. Claire shook his hand, and Alex clapped him on the shoulder. For the first time in weeks, James felt like he could breathe again. But the victory didn't end there. The media coverage of the trial sparked broader scrutiny of the Willow Pines Homeowners Association. Residents began to come forward with their own grievances, leading to a full-scale investigation by the county. Within months, several board members, including the president, were forced to resign. New leadership was elected, and reforms were implemented to ensure greater transparency and fairness in the Homeowners Association's operations. James's garage was returned to him, and though some of his belongings had been lost during Pine Investments' initial clearing, the community came together to help him restore what they could. Neighbors brought tools, decorations, and even small mementos to replace what was gone. One afternoon, as James stood in his garage, now organized and secure, Alex stopped by with a framed photograph of Margaret that he had printed from one of the digital files they had saved during their investigation. "I thought you might like this," Alex said, handing it to him. James took the frame, his eyes misting over as he gazed at the familiar smile of his late wife. "Thank you, Alex," he said quietly, "for everything." The experience had been exhausting and at times disheartening, but James knew it had been worth it. His fight had not only reclaimed his garage but also united his community and exposed the flaws in a system that many had accepted as untouchable. In the end, James Hargrove became more than just a homeowner defending his rights. He became a symbol of resilience and justice in the face of adversity.